Good day. My name is Steve Young, and I'm a Cloud Solution Architect with Microsoft Canada. This is a video recording of a tutorial walkthrough that I provided for a virtual workshop. As sessions have gone from in-person to virtual, I recorded this tutorial as we were not able to provide hands-on labs. The tutorial is itself available at the link shown below. So we used this video as a walkthrough of the tutorial that people could then do on their own. I divided the tutorial up into 9 parts, so each was roughly 5 to 9 minutes, and we'd stop for questions in between each portion. I did not include Demo 2, a walk through the interface, nor Demo 7, orchestrate activities with pipelines, in this recording, as we covered those topics in more detailed discussions. So let's get started. In Demo 1, we're going to set up some of our basic objects for the solution. Here we're signed into our Azure portal, and I like to create the resource group first, creating all of the objects in this one resource group. The resource group in Azure drives security, separation of different projects and groups. This also makes it easier with this type of test or demo in that I can delete the resource group, and when I'm finished, all of the objects created within it will also be deleted. So let's create the resource group first. The resource group will be in East US 2. The resource group location can be anywhere, but I like the consistency and tend to keep my data objects in the same data center to avoid cross data center data charges. As Azure Synapse Analytics is in private preview, it will not be available in every region during this preview. More information will be released closer to GA. So let's create a resource group by clicking on the plus. And if we type in the object that we want to create, so resource group comes up in the search box. We click on resource group, and then we can now click create to create a resource group. So your first step, if you have multiple subscriptions, just make sure that your subscription that you're selecting is the one that you want. The resource group name will have RG ASA demo, and we're actually going to put this in East US 2, which is where our Azure Synapse instance is going to be located. So if we're happy with this, we can click review and create. So on the review and create screen, I do like to go through, make sure I've set up everything correctly, because it's a little harder to change something after you've been in a solution for a month or two. So just make sure that everything is what you're looking for. And then when you're ready, just click on the create. It'll validate. Once it's finished, you'll see up here at the top, your resource group was created. And let's go to the resource group where we can create some of our other objects. In order to create the Azure Synapse instance and workspace, we need to have a data lake first. So let's add one to the resource group. So from the resource group screen, let's click the plus add, search for storage account, and then select create. So we're going to create our storage account. Make sure you're at the correct subscription. The resource group should be auto-populated, as that we created this from within the resource group. A storage account name, again, no special characters, all lowercase. SA for storage account. Tutorial. The location should be in the same region as we want to create our Azure Synapse Analytics instance, and we're going to use US East 2 for that. And for a lot of this, we're just going to keep the default. Keep it simple for the tutorial. Keep the same networking, data protection. Now the advanced, we want to make sure that we have enabled the hierarchical namespace for the Data Lake Gen 2. Tags, again, if you have tags or your organization uses tags to keep track of billing or resources, you can fill any in here. We can review and create. And again, just make sure this is all correct, what you wanted to select, and then let's create. Now that a storage account is created, let's go back to the resource group and create the Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. Now that we're back at the resource group, you can see the data lake is created and listed here as one of the resources. So now let's create the Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. So clicking on Add, typing in Synapse, you'll see the Azure Synapse Analytics, formerly SQL Data Warehouse, so you can still create just a data warehouse, or what we can do is create the preview Azure Synapse Analytics workspaces. So select the workspaces, and then we'll select Create. And so on this screen, we can create our Synapse workspace. So first, make sure that we've got the subscription we're looking for and the resource group. But again, since we asked to add from that resource group, these should be auto-populated. We need a workspace name. So we'll go WS Tutorial Demo. And it says East US 2, which is where our storage account is. And we're going to ask for the storage account, which we had SA Tutorial is our storage account. Now we don't have a file system name as yet, so we're going to create one new. So FS Tutorial Demo. Okay. And we're going to assign myself as a storage blob contributor role on the data lake storage gen 2 account SA Tutorial, and we'll see that just before we end up this demo. So that's all good. So we want to click on Security and Networking. Now here it's going to ask for a SQL Administrator credentials, which we'll cover later, but we're just going to put in a password. Now again, it'll provide one for you and it'll be at the end, but we're just going to put one in now. And we're going to grant control to the workspace's managed entity to all SQL pools and SQL on demand. In essence, it just allows the workspace and everything within the workspace to work together with the SQL pools and SQL on demand that are in the workspace. We're going to skip over tags. We see the summary, and you will notice that the SQL on demand at the moment, the cost is $5 per terabyte. And we're going to create. It'll say our deployment is underway, and it'll just take a little bit to finish that. Once our deployment is complete, let's go back to the resource group, and we should now see that we have our Synapse workspace and the storage account. And before I go on, what we want to do is let's take a look at the storage account. So one item covered in the tutorial was the contributor role. So if I go into the storage account, the access control, we look at role assignments, what you'll notice is the storage contributor role currently, since I was setting everything up and I selected that option, I'm a contributor, and so is the workspace itself, which gives the workspace rights to the container. Now that we have the basics of the environment set up, in this demonstration we're going to create the SQL and Spark pools. If you're completing these tutorials or a demo, remember that you can pause your SQL pools when not in use, as you can scale these quite large and they do cost. Also, since we're creating all of our objects in the same resource group, if you decide to delete the resource group after you've completed any tutorials or demonstrations, all those resources can be deleted. So let's start from our portal screen. There are two ways to get to the workspace. If you're an administrator or have access to the resource group to create or modify objects, you can go through selecting the workspace from your resource group. So if we go into the resource group, we'll see the workspace. And if we click on this, we'll see the object in Azure. So all the settings for the workspace, the administration, security, etc. for the workspace. And there's also a link to the workspace here in the middle. Now, if I'm not an administrator, I'm a developer, I can go to the workspace, and your developers can go to the workspace directly by going to web.azuresynapse.net/workspaces. Now this has already logged me in. So I can choose what Active Directory, if I have multiple Active Directories, what subscription, and then the workspace name. And again, what we have is WS Tutorial Demo. Continue. And this brings me into the workspace. So as you can see on the workspace, it provides you a way to get into the different areas, different tutorials, their useful links. So we're going to expand the different areas, and we're going to go to Manage. So as you can see on the screen, there's a SQL On Demand pool which is already created. Now you can't delete this, and we have a demo on it a little later on. You'll find that every workspace comes with a pre-built SQL On Demand pool. The SQL On Demand pool allows you to work with SQL without having to create or think about managing a SQL pool in Azure. Unlike other kind of pools, billing for SQL On Demand is based on the amount of data scanned to run the query, not on the number of resources used to execute the query. SQL On Demand has its own SQL On Demand database that exists independently from any SQL On Demand pool. A workspace always has exactly one SQL On Demand pool, obviously named SQL On Demand. Select New. So now let's enter a name for our SQL pool. And you'll notice a performance level here, DW100C. Now this is an abstract combination of compute resources. So it's a combination of CPU, memory, and I/O. So I can increase this, again, up to 50, as much as I want. The performance level, again, my subscription won't allow one that large. So we're going to keep it as DW100C, a low-end level. And again, remember, you're billed as long as this is running. So again, you can, once we get to that, you can pause the instance and avoid those charges. So let's click on Additional Settings. And you'll notice here under Additional Settings that we could restore a database either through backup or restore point on another server. We're not going to do that here. You can change the collation, but we're just going to go to the next step, Tags. And in tags, if you're currently using tags which are used to divide your billing, to use automation within PowerShell, you can enter those here. So let's click on Review and Create. And again, I always like to review what I've entered, because again, once it's created and you go down the road of starting to develop, it's very hard to go back and change anything in the future. So once we're happy with everything, let's click Create. And you'll see that it's submitting for deployment. You'll see the process of the deployment, and which could take 5 to 8 minutes, as it said there. And once this is completed, you'll see it here in the list of SQL pools. So you'll notice a few options here as you highlight over. And let's just click on the 3 dots. So what you can do is you can open the SQL DB1, pause, scale, assign tags, and you can also delete. So what we're just going to do here is we're going to pause. There are no queries, so just click pause, and it'll say pausing pool in progress. And in essence, that'll stop us from getting any charges while we're not using it during this demo period. And after a couple of minutes, it shows that we've paused. So now that we have a SQL pool, let's create a Spark pool. Now, this can be deceiving. Despite the name, an Apache Spark pool is not like a SQL pool. It has the same basic metadata that you use to tell Azure Synapse Workspace how to interact with Spark. Because they're metadata, Spark pools can't be started or stopped. When you perform Spark activity in Azure Synapse, you specify a Spark pool to use. The pool tells Azure Synapse how many Spark resources to use, and you only pay for the resources that you use. When an activity stops using the pool, the resources are automatically timed out and recycled. Spark databases are independently created from Spark pools. A workspace always has a Spark database called default. You can create additional Spark databases through code and as you need them. So first, let's create our Apache Spark pool. So we go to Manage, Apache Spark pools, and then obviously we create next. So thanks to the art of consistency, you'll notice that the blades here are the same as we've used to create other Azure objects. So we're going to create a name for our Spark pool, and that will be Spark1. Now auto scaling we can have enabled or disabled. Again, this being a tutorial, I'm going to say disabled. Our node size, and again, being a demo, we could have large, medium, or small. I'm going to use small. And the number of nodes I'm just going to have is 3. So let's go to additional settings. So on the additional settings screen, we can set the auto pause to enable or disable. I always tend to lean towards the enable, and then the number of idle minutes 15. So if it's not doing anything for 15 minutes, it will pause. So what'll happen is if I try to run a script where it is paused, it will take a little bit of time to run up. And again, that could be anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes, depending upon how many nodes you have. And then you can select versions of each item you would like to have within the Spark pool. And again, your data scientist will tell you which ones or which versions, if there's something more than the default that they would like. And again, you can also upload a package of these environment settings. So let's go to the tag screen. And again, you can add tags if you want, or if your organization uses those. And then we'll come to review and create. And again, I always like to review this in detail, because once you've created this and you've created objects and projects against it, it's a little difficult to rechange the name, or you can always make the node size larger or smaller. So there are some things you can change. So now let's just click on create, and it'll submit our deployment request. We'll take a minute or two, and we'll pop back when that's finished. And after about 30 seconds, it's finished. And if I take a look at the Spark line here, the line for the pool, you'll notice that it's the same options as in the SQL pool. I can change the auto pause settings. I can auto scale. I can also assign tags. So again, if I go to auto pause settings, I can change this from enable to disable. And pause this if you're finished. So we'll go on to the next step. So in the next demo, we're going to load and query data both in our SQL pool and Synapse pool. But since this is the test environment, I want to start the SQL pool. So as I go to Manage, the SQL pool, you'll see a Start button. So I click on Start. Resuming will start the pool. And then it'll just be a second or two, and the resuming will finish, and the pool will be running. And after a couple seconds, you'll see the database is online and running. And the big thing to note about the SQL pool versus the Spark pool is that if your Spark pool is paused, all you have to do is run a query against the Spark pool and it will start up. However, the SQL side of the world, you actually have to have it running before it'll accept any queries. So for our demos, we're going to load in the New York City taxi sample data into the SQL DB1 database that we've created. Now up here in the upper right, you'll see a question mark. So if I select this, you'll see a Getting Started and a Getting Started hub. So if I select the Getting Started hub, you'll see that you can take a tour of Synapse, or what this will also provide you with is a way to load sample data into our SQL DB1 for queries. So what we're going to do is select the instance and load data, and it'll take a second or two. So once the data is loaded, you'll get this green bar at the top saying you were successful. And for this moment, I'm going to click on Get Started with Sample Scripts. So what it's going to do is load some sample scripts here for you to take a look at. And we're just going to close out of that. So you'll see two Getting Started scripts, one sample query, one bring your own data, and we'll get to those in a little while. So to get us started, if we take a look at the SQL pool, you'll see the tables that were created when we loaded the sample data. And here under Actions, we're just going to create a new SQL script. And let's just select top 100 rows. So this gives us a SQL script, some items, and we have connectivity. So there's a button over here in Properties. We're going to create a name for this script, passenger count, and enter a description. For sample script passengers. And again, if you are creating scripts in your environment, you want to provide names that are meaningful and descriptions that are meaningful, because you're going to find that this being a collaborative environment, you're going to have a number of people creating objects. You can create folders and you can create areas for all of these. But again, collaboratively, you want to make sure you provide names that are meaningful and descriptions. So I'm going to pop in here, and the tutorial that we're currently running through for these demos, I'm going to copy the passenger count script, and what I'm going to do is replace that script and paste in the passenger count script. So let's take a run of this script. You'll see that it started the execution, it's executed, and here we have our passenger counts. Now, what you'll notice here, if you're used to SQL notebooks, which we'll get into in a little while in another demo, but here you have a table, you can export the results, you have a chart. So anybody who is using any of the machine learning notebooks, etc., you're used to this kind of environment where you've got a result table, you've got a chart, I can change the lines. So it gives you some interactivity. So if you're providing queries to do discovery, your analysts can do a little bit of work here to make sure that their query was right and providing the information that they were looking for. So to finish this side up, we've got the passenger counts. We can take a look, do we run the SQL on demand or SQL DB? And we're using the database SQL DB. So it just shows you where this script is connected to. But right now, this is only saved here in this web page. But we can publish these scripts. So I'm going to publish all three. And that will publish. We come into develop, and now here are these SQL scripts here and saved, and I can come back and run these scripts. So let's take a look at loading data into the SQL pool from a data lake. This being a quick demo, I've already have the script here. So you're going to use the copy command to copy weather data from a blob store. It's in a Parquet file, has a open shared access signature, and it's going to create the table weather and load that data in. So if I click run, and it's now finished. So it loaded 10 million rows of data in about 57 seconds from the blob store into the SQL pool. So if I come over to the data, look at the SQL pool, and I refresh my tables, I'll see weather. And if I say SQL script, select top 100 rows. So I have now loaded data from the data lake into the SQL pool. And again, using the copy function. So since I've now finished, you'll notice that it says congratulations. When you're done exploring, pause or delete the pool. So what we're going to do is pause the pool. But first, I want to publish these scripts so that I've saved my changes. I'm then going to go to manage my SQL pools, and then SQL DB1. I'm going to pause. And since I don't have any active queries, I'm going to pause that SQL pool. And in the next tutorial, let's load some data into the Spark pool. So in this tutorial, we're going to load some New York City taxi data that we've already loaded into our SQL pool. And we're going to load that and create a Spark database called NYC Taxi. So we're going to go to Develop and add a Develop, and we're going to add a notebook. So you'll see if you've done any machine learning or artificial intelligence, you'll notice this looks a lot like the Spark notebooks that you're used to. So we're attached to the Spark pool, and we're going to run PySpark, and we're going to add some code. So from the tutorial, we're going to grab some code, and we're going to paste this into a code cell. So what this is going to do is going to run Spark. It's going to create a database, NYC Taxi, if it's not already created. It's going to read from, and again, use the package SQL Analytics. So from the SQL pool, the trip table, and it's going to save that as a table in nyctaxi.trip database. So if we run this, so it's starting our Spark session. So right now the Spark pool, because I had it as a pausing after 15 minutes of inactivity, so it's going to spin that up. It may take a minute or two. And once it's spun up, it'll run the code. So we now see the job is running. Let's expand. The job succeeded. 12 seconds. We get the results and the notifications. So before we go and see the data, let's give the notebook a name. Spark create taxi data DB. Spelled data correctly. Demo script. So let's publish this to save it. And now let's come to data. Let's refresh the databases. And you'll see now that we have the default Spark database that was created when we created this database. We look at the tables, the trip data, and we see the columns. So we have columns. So let's add some code here. I'm just to see it's there. I'm actually going to create a data frame and select data from that table. So I run, and job succeeded, and I have data in that table. So what we've done here is, if we have used Spark to create a Spark database and import data from a SQL pool, so now we have data in both Spark and SQL available to be used in other demos. And so when you think about it, we have data both in the SQL and Spark side, and we've been able to create and move data between these, so that in a collaborative environment where you have data scientists, data engineers, data analysts, it's just an example of how each user group can create data that can be consumed by others. In this demo, we're going to play the role of a data scientist and expand on the previous demo by analyzing data that we had imported into the Spark database, and then we're going to export that analysis to a SQL pool. Just as a recap, let's go to Develop, and this is a Spark notebook that we had created earlier. So let's take a look at the table nycitytaxi.trip, and again you can see the data is here. So we're going to use this as a source for further analysis. So let's add code, and I have some code here. And what you'll notice is that this is the SQL statement that we ran in a previous demo against a SQL table. But in using spark.sql, we can run that against the Spark table as a SQL, and we're going to save that table back to the Spark database as passenger count stats. So we run this query. You can see the job is executing, and we're just going to expand that just to see. And you see save as table, and then you can just follow this through if you want, or then the table appears once the run is complete. So let's go to the database, see the NY City taxi, the tables, and let's refresh the tables. And you can see now that we have the passenger count statistics, and we have columns, and this is the data that was loaded. So this table is now there for further analysis. So in the next step, let's add some code to bring in some other Spark libraries and reuse this table. So let's add code, paste our code in. So what you'll notice is that you can control how charts are rendered by using the notebooks. The following code shows a simple example, but it uses the popular libraries matplotlib and Seaborn. The code renders the same kind of line chart as we saw in the SQL queries that we ran a little earlier. So let's run the query. It's going to take the data from the passenger count stats. And so we now have a graph using those libraries. So this is simply an example of being able to import libraries from Python, use those in data against the Spark table. So now let's round trip this and write this analysis back to our SQL pool. So if I take a look, this is going to run a select star from the passenger counts, and this is actually going to write this back to our SQL pool, passenger count stats. So if we run this, you'll see the job executing. And completing. So now let's go back to our SQL pool and look at our tables. And you can see here our passenger count stats. Let's just throw a select to take a look at those. And you see here, so what we've been able to do is, as a data scientist, create some analysis and then write that back to the SQL pool. And that can be for our SQL analysts or other processes that we want to have that are running at a SQL. So it's simply the ability to round trip that data back. So one final thing I want to show is running a SQL on-demand query. We're going to run a SQL on-demand query against the table that we just created in the Spark engine. Tables in the Spark database are automatically visible and again can be queried by SQL on-demand. So I can come in to develop, create a SQL script, and you'll see how it says here SQL on demand. Use the database New York Taxi. I'm just going to paste the query in here and run. And you can see it runs against that Spark database. In this demo, we're going to work with data in the storage account. One of the key points of Azure Synapse Analytics is the ability to create a curated data lake that is available to various analysts and teams in your organization. With the data in the data lake, you have the ability to work with the data directly in various applications in the Synapse platform. Let's look at a few examples of consuming data directly from the data lake. In the first scenario, we'll use the primary storage account of the workspace and container that we specified when creating the workspace. So let's start by creating files in the data lake by exporting data from our Spark database. So let's go to Develop, and we're going to create a notebook. And that notebook is going to be called Export. to data lake, demo script, data lake. So add code. I'm going to paste the script in. And so what this will do is it'll run a SQL statement through Spark, and it's going to export that data to a CSV file in our data lake. New York Taxi will be the directory, passenger counts.csv, and it's going to write a Parquet file to the New York City Taxi directory, passenger count stats.parquet. So let's run the script. And since we don't have the Spark session started at the moment, it's paused. It will start the session and then run the script. And as we see the job running, it is now stopped. Everything has succeeded. So there's two ways that we can see the files in the data lake. So if we come up to Data, Linked, Storage Accounts, we'll see the primary storage account. We'll see the primary container. And you'll see here NYC taxi data that we created. And there are the passenger count stats and passenger count stats, the Parquet file and CSV. So as we've been talking about Azure Synapse Analytics in the Workspace portal, we also have, if you have access, you also have the ability through tools such as the Azure Data Explorer. I can come to the data lake, the blob container, come to the file, and then I can now see the files here in the data lake. So again, not as long as you have access to the data lake, and that's through Azure Synapse Analytics, you can consume all of these assets in different applications outside of Azure Synapse Analytics. So let's walk through the following example. Let's say I'm an analyst and I have access to the Synapse workspace and the files within the data lake. I've found the area I want to work in, and so I can go into the directory, come to the file or files that I'm looking for. I can right-click, say New Notebook, and you'll see that it's popped me into a new notebook attached to Spark and PySpark, and it's given me the connection string and everything I need to create a connection to that data. So if I run this, it's going to show me the top 100 records in that file. And that record comes back, provided the top 100 records in that file. But again, it's an example of going to the data lake, selecting the group of files or file that you want to analyze, selecting them, right-clicking in a notebook, and that notebook is created with the connection, with the files, and ready to work on. So I could then create another code cell and continue with my analysis. So it's not only the data scientists in Spark. So if I close this, let's go back to the data lake. I can also right-click, ask for a new SQL script, select top 100 rows, and you'll see I get an open row set, the bulk load connection, and if I run here, you will also notice that it's SQL on demand and using the master database because it is an open row set. So it's starting the query, and the query comes back. And again, in this notebook, you've got the ability to chart, have tables, etc. But again, this is an example of being able to go into a data lake when you're in the Azure Synapse Analytics workspace, right-click on the files you're looking for, and brings back the connection strings and your ability to work in a record set and a data set based on those files. So I've got one more example. Let's say that I have a series of files and I know that I only want a certain number. Let's say whether it's the first 3 months, each month is a file, or there's some reason why I only want a specific. We've done examples so far where you go in and select a file. So I have crime data from Boston in 2016 in Parquet format. So if I come in here, I see I have a number of files. But let's say that I only wanted, let's just pull the first 3. Now, as an analyst, I could then right-click, New Script, and let's just say, select the top 100 rows. So what comes back is an open row set where the files are in these paths. So rather than creating a very long connection string, I can just select the files I want from the data lake. I can then click Run. And here are the records within that file or set of files. What I can also do is I could take this and again put that to a Spark table. I could put that to a SQL table. I can work on it there and do other analysis as well. But this is simply an example of being able to select a selection of files from a list and then have that same functionality. The last major portion we'll cover today in these demos is data visualization. We'll see how Power BI is an integrated development experience within the platform. If you're creating an extensive data model, you'll still have to do this within the Power BI desktop application and publish that to Power BI, but you'll use the analytics platform as a source. Your data engineers and Power Analysts create the data sources, and the Power BI visualization analysts will create the dashboards and reports through the Workspace tool. From the New York City data, we created aggregated data sets which are residing here in the Azure Data Workspaces. We'll link a Power BI workspace to the Azure Synapse workspace. This will allow us to easily get data into the Power BI reports. So our first step is to create a Power BI workspace. So I've already signed into my Power BI subscription. I'm going to go to Workspaces, Create Workspace, and we're going to enter in a workspace name and description. Now the workspace name has to be unique within your organization. So I'm going to have NYC demo video as my name. It's available, and this will be temp workspace, and I'm going to click Save. So now I have a workspace ready to link. So now let's go back to the Azure Synapse workspace and create a linked service. So we can go to Manage, Link Services, and New. And as you can see, there are many services that we can connect to. And again, there are services added all the time. So if you find that there's a service that isn't in here, there's a feedback button that feel free to add any suggestions or any services that you find you would like added. So we're going to select Power BI, continue, and we're just going to keep the Power BI Workspace 1 as the name. This will be our demo workspace. And we're going to link to the workspace, and you'll see a number here, NYC, to filter down, and you'll see the NYC demo video workspace that we just created in Power BI. And we're going to create this linked service. You'll see that it's creating. And here we have it here in the list of linked services. So now let's create a Power BI dataset that uses data from our Azure Synapse workspace. So we're going to come over to Develop. And as you see, we now have Power BI as an option here. Click on Power BI Datasets, New Power BI Dataset. And we're going to start. Select the SQL pool that has the data set that we're looking for. Continue. And that's going to give us a pbids file. We're going to download that pbids file. So now that it's finished downloading, we're going to click on Continue. And it's asking us to open the file in Power BI Desktop. Close and refresh. So now we're going to go to the file we just downloaded. And if we double click on the file, it's going to open Power BI Desktop and bring up the sign-on screen for the dataset. Remember that Power BI will not copy such as the credentials that you used. So we're going to have to type in our credentials. So I'm going to click on Microsoft account. Now, since I'm in Power BI and I'm already signed in to the same ID that I'm using in the Azure Synapse workspace, I can just select I'm going into the SQL DB1 that was in the connection file. I'm going to sign in, validate, because I do have two-factor authentication on, and I can connect. And as you can see, I can see all of the tables that are in the SQL DB1 database. So I'm going to just select passenger count. I'm going to load that data. And as the connection comes up, it'll ask me to actually import or direct query. I'm going to use direct query. It's going to create my connection. Create the connection in the model. And as you can see here, I've got the passenger count stats. Now very quickly, I'm just going to create a very simple report. So I'm going to take the line chart and hide the filters here. Let's make this a little larger so we can see that. So I'm going to drag the passenger count to the axis. I'm going to drag the sum of trip distance and the average trip distance columns to the visualization values. Make this a little larger. So we're going to publish, and we're going to save our changes, and we'll just call this sample workbook. Once it's saved in our computer, we're going to dump it to our workspace. Which is NYC demo video. Select. We're going to wait for it to publish. Once it's published, we're going to go over to the Power BI workspace. Got it. Let's go to the Power BI workspace. Go to the NYC demo video, and you'll see that our sample workbook report is there and our data set is there. The first thing you'll notice is that your credentials will not have been copied in, because when you're publishing from Power BI workbooks, it will not keep your credentials. You actually have to go into the data set and add your credentials. So if we go into the data set, we go into settings. You'll see here the credentials need to be entered. So we enter the credentials, and we're going to actually use OAuth 2, and each user will use their own credentials when accessing the data source. Privacy level, we're just going to set to organizational. Sign in. And we're going to sign in using our Active Directory account. And now that that's set up, let's go back to Azure Synapse Analytics, the workspace, and come over to the Develop Hub. And what we're going to do is refresh. And down here in the Power BI reports, you'll see our reports. We select the report. And you'll see here we have the report. Now we can also edit the report here. So let's take the passenger count and the sum of trip distance. Put these into the values. So we're able to edit the reports. We're going to save the reports. And so after having developed the report in the Azure Synapse workspace, if we go to Power BI, and you'll see here this is the workspace, and if I come to the report, so the report is now in the workspace and available for other people working in Power BI.